Hi, I'm Dr. David Dobson. Welcome to Conversations. Today, my guest is Dr. Wade Deisman. Wade is Associate Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of the Fraser Valley. He holds a PhD in sociology from Carleton University and is a renowned criminologist whose research spans surveillance studies, national security, and the sociology of punishment. Currently, he is heading a national initiative to bring post-secondary education into every correctional facility in Canada. Today, we will be discussing why a classroom in every prison is more than a policy goal. It is a moral imperative. Wade, thank you for joining me.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. Mhm.
Wade, what was a specific moment or encounter in a correctional facility that made you realize a classroom in every prison wasn't just a good idea, but a moral necessity?
Well, I had started teaching in prisons in about 2011. And at that time, the program that I was teaching for involved bringing students from the university inside the prison. And what happened was I saw that this tremendous transformation was happening when the students from the outside were coming in. Their kind of sense of learning mission was awakened. And of course, for the folks inside, just the opportunity to study in prison was having a tremendous effect. A couple of weeks later, I was talking to the warden at that prison, and the warden said already she was seeing a difference in the morale of the folks who were taking the course. And so I started to see this transformative effect that was happening. Then I got interested as a criminologist in the literature. And what the literature shows definitively is that there is no silver bullet in terms of rehabilitation, but there's one that comes very close, and that's access to education. And after that, and having had that experience inside, I became a real true believer in the whole notion of kind of breaking down divides and creating pathways for folks who are imprisoned to find their way out and have a soft landing and have a trajectory forward. And that's what a classroom in every prison promises to do.
Mhm. It's a wonderful story. It sounds like you're trying to build a bridge where most people only see a wall. I want to talk about what
Mm-hmm.
happened to that bridge. In your experience, how does the atmosphere of a physical classroom change the social dynamic within a prison environment compared to an isolated individual study?
It's such a good question. And that's actually part of the curriculum of the course is about understanding what a total institution is. This idea of a total institution, of course, comes from Goffman. So from the moment you enter a prison, you get this sense of total control, of total surveillance. They search you, they scan your belongings through. You have a guard that escorts you all of the time. And you go into the classroom. If you're lucky, it's a classroom. It may just be a space. It might be a gymnasium, right? Sometimes we end up using the parole meeting room where people go for parole.
Mhm.
And that's when this transformation that I was talking about starts to happen, because somehow in the process of sitting in a circle and talking with people both from the inside and the outside, when education starts to work its magic, a space of freedom emerges in the place you would least likely expect it to emerge, which is in the prison. And I got to say that I never really understood how powerfully potent education was until I started to have that experience, and saw what it was doing to the folks who are locked up inside, who have not experienced that sense of freedom in a very long time. So freedom is a state of mind as much as it is a state of being. That's what I would say. And
Mhm.
that's what the students do for each other. They create the freedom to get to know each other, to inquire, to challenge, to criticize, to hope, to dream, all of those things. Yeah.
It's fascinating how a simple change in geography from cell to a classroom can shift a person's humanity. But for that shift to matter outside the gates, the academic standards have to be undeniable. Following that thought on the environment, how do we ensure that the education provided in these spaces carries the same weight and accreditation as a degree earned at a traditional university like UFV?
Yeah, and I think when we were first contemplating going into the prison, we imagined that we would have to reduce our standards, that we would have to kind of tinker with the bar, if I can put it that way.
Mm,
But I have to say that this is one of the things that surprised me the most at the beginning was that the folks on the inside, they're not coming at it with the same level of literacy as
mm,
the students who are in their first or second year,
mm,
but they're coming at it with a tremendous sense of hunger and a tremendous sense of drive. And so really the challenge, I think, is to channel that in ways that actually end up with them kind of starting to meet some of those standards and
mm,
seeing the dividends of
mm,
investing in a kind of learning course and stuff like that. So I got to tell you this story, David. In the early days of each class, the first
mm.
2 or 3 sessions, the outside students are just kind of curious about, what the inside students will be like. The
Yeah.
inside students are doing all of their readings. They're journaling. They've got notes. They come with their books ready in hand.
Mm,
They're sitting in the circle long before
mm,
the outside students, and they're ready to go. And
mm,
so I've heard on a number of different occasions, the outside students after class will say, "Hey, we got to pick up our game." Those inside students, they're really and so it's interesting because what happens is there's a renewed sense of learning mission amongst the outside
mm,
students.
mm,
Seeing that part, they start
mm,
to realize there's a deeper gift in education here that
mm,
maybe I haven't been.
mm,
So then the real challenge is how can we
mm,
get them to start teaching each other? And that's
mm,
my favorite part of the course. I always
mm.
say, by about week 7, I hope that you guys will be teaching each other and I can kind of
Mm.
sit back.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful and wonderful. So if the education is rigorous and the credits are real, the impact must eventually leak out of the classroom into the hallway of the facility itself. So
Mm.
beyond the individual students, what does a classroom in every prison do for the culture of the correctional staff and the community at large?
Mm. That's one of the questions that I really, really appreciated coming from you because it really lit up my mind of some of the amazing things I've seen. And another story is when we first started coming into a high medium, which is very, you have some very serious offenders in there. The first few weeks after, we would talk to the guards afterwards, and they would say things to us like, "Don't ever turn your back on them. You can't trust them." Those kinds of things. So it gives you a sense of how oppositional the cultures can be.
Mm,
But over time, when the correctional officials see what's happening with the students, they can see the changes. They see
mm,
changes in their morale and changes in their attitude and their mood
mm,
and their orientation towards their correctional plans, all of those kinds of things. Um, then we start to slowly win them over. And
mm,
by the end, those correctional officials who are providing security for the thing, they experience their own kind of sense of lift and hope. I think is one of the things because those divisions diminish. They participate even if they're just standing on the outsides in the correctional ceremonies. So when I teach at Quelp, the healing village in Agassiz, that's where I don't know if you know that,
mm,
but that's a famous healing village, and the correctional officials will be in the longhouse when we have the blanket ceremony when they graduate, and they will shake their hands.
mm,
So their position changes too as a
mm,
result of this, and so that's often why we get invited back, is because people say, "Hey, that made a big difference."
mm,
And
mm,
to me, one of the things, there is a core of a covert curriculum in all of this teaching. One of the core things that I like to kind of call attention to is that the carceral mentality is internalized by people, not just prisoners, but guards, everyone. And it's that oppositional thing. And so
mm,
the course, in a way, that opportunity helps everybody to undo and let go of some of that. Now, some of that correctional orientation is necessary, but when it becomes that oppositional orientation, then it becomes counterproductive. So we've seen that time and time again. Yeah.
You have painted a picture of a community being transformed, but we
Mm-hmm.
can't ignore the elephant in the room, the fact that these classrooms exist inside a high security apparatus.
Mm-hmm.
We have talked about the culture and the community, but there is a constant presence of these facilities, surveillance. In your view, does the intense surveillance of the prison system actually hinder the vulnerability required for true learning?
That's a very good question and a tricky one. The one of the things we do with the outside students before they are allowed to go to the prison is we have a session, a security session with the correctional officers and the people who work intelligence. And I was always worried that they would create the feeling of othering in the outside students so that when they met the inmates, they wouldn't see them. And so the inmates would feel like they're being surveilled even by the students. Foucault talks about this notion of the gaze. The way that somebody looks at you frames you, and you can tell fairly quickly how they're framing you from their gaze. And so we had to actually work for quite a while to not soften exactly, but recontour that way of framing things. Because the fact of the matter is that these folks are in prison for a reason, and we can't soft shoe that. We can't sugarcoat that with the outside students, right? But nor does that mean that they're not human, right? Which is what happens in some kinds of cases. So there is this tension always between acknowledging that boundaries need to be kept. And I have seen from time to time, and because I've probably taught, more than 15 now, I've seen from time to time violations happen. People develop feelings for each other in some contexts. Sometimes somebody thinks about giving something so they can send it out or bring something into the prison, all of those kinds of things. And so that tells me that, this took me a while to learn this lesson, but that the surveillance is necessary, right? And it can, I think you're right, it can impact on the degree to which a kind of that freedom and openness, if you set it up in a too draconian fashion. So there's a kind of fine balance there, is all I could say on that one, I think. Yeah, it's tricky.
So if that surveillance creates such a high barrier for vulnerability, it raises a practical question about the environment itself.
Mhm.
Wait, how do we create a safe intellectual space in a high security environment?
Mm-hmm. Well, we use an approach that is deeply grounded in kind of indigenous principles, and it's the circle. And the circle, as we teach it and talk about it, is a circle of trust and a circle of sacredness, right? And it's protected in that sense. So, it's understood that everyone shares the responsibility for the guardianship of the circle, and that one of the most sacred responsibilities is to hold space for each other for that intellectual freedom, for that power of inquiry. And so sometimes people will say, well, does that mean that I can denounce the prison, right? For example, this would seem like a violation. And our response to that has been, and we had to do some soul searching ourselves, is to say, yes, it does mean that you can denounce it, but you cannot start a campaign to overthrow the prison in our class. Right? So, it's the expression of ideas versus ideas that are attached to a plan of action, right? And in our discussions with correctional officials, wardens, that kind of thing, they're comfortable with that line, drawing that line, because it's actually counterproductive to deny people the right to vent, to fulminate, to critique, the circumstances that are oppressing them. And the reality is, the deprivation of liberty is a terrible, oppression to visit on people. So you need to allow, and for the purposes of education, that has to be protected. Otherwise, it's a sham. Sorry, that's a hard way of putting it, but unless the true opportunity to be your full self is there, it's indoctrination. And we don't want anything to do with that, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that tension between security and vulnerability is really the heart of the challenge. It makes me wonder about the long-term finish line of this work. Wait,
Mm-hmm.
if we fast forward 10 years and your mission of a classroom in every prison has become the standard across the Canadian correctional system, not the
Mm-hmm.
exception, how does that change the fabric of our society beyond the
Mm-hmm.
prison walls?
Mm-hmm. Well, some very interesting little known facts are that prisons are tremendously expensive. The return on investment for a life sentence is absolutely horrible. It costs somewhere between $120,000 and $140,000 to imprison a male for 1 year. It costs somewhere between $120,000 and $150,000 to imprison a woman for a year. And when you think about what we could get for that $150,000, it's a school teacher and a social worker, or that kind of thing. And so we need to think about what the kind of payoff is, what the return on investment is, and really, I think that what we're trying to work for in the longer term is a society that doesn't need prisons, to tell you the truth. And one of the ways that we can do that is by acknowledging that many of the people who are in prison and end up repeating their crime have had that experience because they didn't have access to education. I mean, many people say, oh, this is about getting access to them. Well, the fact is they didn't have access in the first place, so they kind of deserve it. They kind of require it, right? And I would be remiss if I didn't point out that that's particularly true for Indigenous people, like our prison populations. Indigenous people make up about 6% of our population and about 30% of the male prison population, almost 50% of the female prison population. And, it would be, insane not to recognize that that's due to systemic disadvantage all the way along, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that the longer term goal is to start to create a society where we can undo the need for prisons and we can change at a deeper level the carceral mentality. I think, our whole society is built around the notion that if you do wrong, you're going to be subject to punishment and harm. Well, in the early levels, that leads to violence, and violence leads to a lot of the stuff that we see in prisons. Now, I know this sounds utopian, but we are starting to see in other societies, right? In the Scandinavian countries, for example, their rates of incarceration are far, far lower. And it's because they have a social safety net and an apparatus from the very beginning, birth onward, that kind of protects people from spiraling into what Max Weber called like abysmal life chances, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that's the longer term vision. But in the short term, I think part of the vision anyway is simply to say criminology and public policy have not come up with any better solution than this one. This one works. Let's do it.
Yeah, that's a powerful vision. To ground
Mhm.
that for our listeners, is there one specific student or success story you have seen that serves as a blueprint for what this 10-year future could look
Mhm.
like?
Mhm. Well, I've seen, because I've been doing this so long, I've seen so many just,
Yeah.
really touching, heart-rendering stories. But I did want to share two. One is the of when I was teaching at Quelp, of someone who was taking the program from the inside and then finished and was released, and then ended up taking the program on the outside at university, and now has gone on to get a job working with populations that are are, more vulnerable to incarceration and imprisonation. So
Beautiful.
the fellow who has done that, he talked at the Western Deans of Arts and Science meeting. He spoke to them and addressed them, and he had some of them in tears. It was such a moving story.
Mm-hmm.
The other story I have, which I think is very important to remember, is about people from the United States in Graterford prison, and that Graterford is a supermax prison. I think its population is 3,800 inmates, and they formed a core called the Think Tank for Prison Education. And they have sent out publications, they've produced resources, they've changed the face of incarceration in Philadelphia from the inside out. And that's why the program in Philadelphia and across the United States is called Inside Out.
Nice. Before we wrap up, Wade, is there
Yeah.
any final thought you would like to leave our audience with?
Well, just to say that this initiative of mine called CAPE, the Canadian Alliance for Prison Education, is really aimed at that idea of saying that we can do more, we can do better. We already know what the answers are here. And so when we reached out to the Deans of Arts and Science, what we wanted to say to them really is, why don't you think about getting behind this? And so we created this website that has a map of Canada, has a map of every prison in Canada, every university or college in Canada. And every time somebody signs up to deliver a program to a prison or to a remand center or to a halfway house, we will map them on the map with a golden line that connects the two. And so slowly over time, people are going to be able to see it until the whole map is lit up.
Wonderful. Wade, thank you for your time and sharing the important work you are doing in carceral education. We wish you all the best in your effort with the prison reform in Canada.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And anybody who's interested in getting involved is always welcome to reach out.